Welcome, and thank you for joining Emotional Intelligence and Change, the third webinar in our series presented by Digineer. My name is Jack Thiesing, and I will be your moderator today. I would like to introduce today's speakers. David Cole is a business analyst and ProSci certified change management consultant at Digineer. He has over 5 years of experience with organization transformations and technology implementations in the banking, healthcare, and pharmacy benefit management industries. David focuses on helping IT organizations align technology with people and processes. Shannon Rose is a senior organizational change consultant at Digineer with over 15 years of experience in the global medtech and healthcare industries. Shannon helps companies engage their global employees, leadership, and customers through emotionally intelligent change leadership and corporate culture impact. The motto she lives by is, "Be the change you want to see in the world," by Mahatma Gandhi. If you have questions, please type them into the Q&A feature of this webinar. Also, both David and Shannon are going to be broadcasting with their webcams. Zoom has options that allow you to change how you see the presenters during the presentation. And now I'll turn the presentation over to David and Shannon.
Thank you, Jack. Welcome, everybody. This is such an incredible topic. I'm extremely passionate about it, and I know David is as well. So first, we're going to launch a poll. I wanted to make sure that we launch a poll and gauge what our collective knowledge is or experience surrounding emotional intelligence. Just take a quick moment, reflect a little bit. But I remember in one of my first project management roles, I was on the receiving end of change, and we were going through a major rebuild of our multilingual software. Our old system was hard-coded, very linear, and if you messed up, basically you had to start over. In the new system, it was built for adaptability and changes on the fly. And the only thing was it was going to change how we worked deeply. And not only on our own projects, but how we coordinated with and communicated with our global teams and vendors and leaders. But because it was a system change, people and how people interacted with it was an afterthought, and they simply deployed the system and provided how-tos and job aids. And I remember feeling very confused and frustrated, right? I didn't know where to go for help, and my work was delayed during an already busy time. And I found myself apologizing and feeling so responsible for the issues that were happening. Very little emotional intelligence was being used during that rollout. And so, that experience shows how the lack of emotional intelligence can really impact a change. So I see it as a collective group that we have varying, levels of knowledge or experience with emotional intelligence. And I think that's fantastic and totally acceptable. And as we go through this, I hope to not only deepen your knowledge of emotional intelligence, but help that existing knowledge tie to your change work. All right. So as we all come into change as ourselves, right? We're all individuals with our own biases, with our own assumptions. And it's a challenge to leave these things aside, to be truly objective through a process. Looking beyond these assumptions and beyond these boundaries for ways to engage ourselves and individuals involved in change, to engage the diversity of those involved in change, and find ways to bring everyone successfully through change. With our ever-changing and ever-expanding business ecosystem, that is fueled by our society, by our environment, and by our growing customer needs, there must, in all of this, be a center, in my eyes, a place where change meets humanity, where not only a technical change can be successful, yet adoption and engagement, positive outcomes are possible. People actually feel good about the change they're going through and their contribution to it. This takes an approach that melds two concepts that I personally believe go hand in hand, and that I use in conjunction each and every day in my life and my work. So I'm going to hand it over to David to talk about change management. Go ahead, David.
Really, change management, it's about adding structure really to a change and the application of tools and processes. Like at Digineer, we take an approach that likes to break down the complexity and rigidity of many of the common organizational change methodologies. So it requires addressing and managing all aspects of the change throughout the process, and does things like analyze the stakeholders, creates effective communications, addresses the resistance, and measures the effectiveness of the outcomes. So really, when we say change management, we mean that we're grounding the desire for change in real, tangible outcomes and deliverables.
And so emotional intelligence, right, to pair with that as we go along here, is how we interact with ourselves and others, how we react during times of stress, and how we ultimately are making decisions, right? This all leads to having a happy and fulfilling life for ourselves, for our teams, our communities, and our world. And that's the ultimate point here. When you have happy environments, when you have happy, engaged individuals, you have successful change outcomes. So based on the EQI 2.0 model of emotional intelligence, there's 5 core scales or overarching concepts that we'll be touching on. Briefly, they are self-perception, which involves self-regard, self-actualization, emotional self-awareness. Then there's self-expression, emotional expression, assertiveness, independence. There's interpersonal, which means interpersonal relationships, how we empathize, how we impact society and our social responsibility to do so. Decision-making, which involves problem solving, reality testing, and impulse control. And finally, stress management, our flexibility, our stress tolerance, our optimism, right? The place where change meets humanity is when we integrate emotional intelligence and change management. It's how we use our interpersonal relationships with others and ourselves to carry us all through evolving and unpredictable change, no matter what phase change is in. And it's about building capabilities for resilience, adaptability, mindfulness, consciousness, and empathy. This is really where true change happens. So we'll have some transition slides here where we're going to highlight the tenets that we'll be talking about in the following slides. Those will be highlighted in green. So it just gives you a brief intro to that. Our position in work, our role is one thing, right? We could be a project manager, we could be a coordinator, a change leader, a sponsor, but how we show up is a different thing. In emotional intelligence, there's 2 of the 5 core attributes that focus on how we interact with ourselves and how we begin to show up to the environment around us. Self-perception, how we respect ourselves while understanding and accepting our own strengths and weaknesses. How we view self-improvement, recognizing and understanding our own emotions and what causes them. What are our triggers in these high stress environments? Self-expression, how we openly express our feelings, how we communicate our beliefs and thoughts, and how we defend our rights and values in a non-defensive and non-destructive manner. Very important during change. Our ability to be self-directed and make decisions free from emotional dependency. So why is that so important? Well, in change, it is first our responsibility to set a tone and an energy within ourselves. As a change leader or a change team member, if I won't show up to a change in a positive, flexible, and open way, how can I expect others around me to do so? If I'm feeling confused as a change leader, How are those who are actually going through the change feeling? When I lead change, I first look within myself. It's not easy all the time, but at my own resistance points, and I try to address those, right? It's not easy to look at your own flaws, but it is important to understand what's causing hesitancy within yourself. And I try to do that. And I try to think and I work through, what do I need in order to move past that? That gives me insight and empathy into what others are going through while I'm trying to lead them through change. If trust is not visible or felt in a current situation, how do I show up in a trusting way so that others know what trust looks and feels like? And if I feel alone and uninformed, how can I build confidence and engagement within myself so others can show up in the same way? So we can overcome these obstacles together as a change team, right? Fear-based emotions, they're easy to give into. Yet fear spreads and breeds more fear and anger and resistance, which completely work against change. Mood and energy and authenticity are contagious. And when we show up the way we want change to go, we spread a different energy that sets change up for success. So we're going to launch another poll. It's a quick self-assessment. So I'm going to let you read through each of these questions. There's 2 of them. On a scale of from 1 to 5, we're going to rank ourselves on self-perception and self-expression. You know, and it can be difficult to rank ourselves. I know it's hard for me to be honest, you know, with myself about my own weaknesses and sometimes even my own strengths. But this happens when I'm worried about what the world's thinking, instead of clearing the voices in my head and taking an honest look at how I'm actually showing up. As an individual, if you're ranking yourselves lower in either of these categories, look at some of your strengths. How can you use your strengths in other areas to elevate your perception of self or how you express yourself? For example, I know that I first feel defensive when I receive feedback in my work. Instead of reacting to this based off of how I'm feeling, I can use my positivity, which I score very high on, to remind myself to assume best intent. And that feedback drives improvement and win-win scenarios. This results in a pause. It results in me listening to a situation versus reacting to a heated situation. Do we have results yet? Let's see. So this is interesting. As a group, right, we have overall scores that rank from mid-range to high. Some rank a little lower. But what this shows you is the variety that makes up a team, right? The variety of how people are showing up, how people are viewing themselves and beginning to show up to an environment. And when we have a team, we will always have these varying emotional strengths and weaknesses. But coupled with stressful situations and diverse personalities, emotional awareness and the ability to leverage and adapt them in the moment can be extremely powerful in a team dynamic. Okay, so if we go to our next one.
Okay. So as we move across these factors, we reach interpersonal, which is how we interact with others and have mutually satisfying relationships, and decision-making, which is your problem-solving ability and ability to make decisions when emotions are involved. So these 2 factors really impact how we interact with those around us. When we talk about organizational changes, it can't go overlooked to address this integrated network of relationships that are created to make it work. These are all the people with a stake in the change to make it successful. So this group of people are part of your change coalition, and as a leader or change manager, your projection of the self into this team will greatly impact the results of your initiative. As we transition from this internal view of self that Shannon was talking about to now our view externally, this team around this team that we surround ourselves with will feel and absorb this influence. So this is where that chain of events starts to ripple across the environment into the organization. And this stuff is really cool to me. As you bring your own energy, the way you show up has such an effect on all these roles around you. The team dynamic comes into play, and your interpersonal and decision-making skills are affecting more than just yourself at this point. So effective change management requires involvement and action by many people in the organization. The change management lead is an integral part of all of these folks and bringing them all together to work as a machine. So you have your senior leaders who provide active and visible sponsorship throughout the project and really advocate for the work. There's the project team who execute the change, often from a systems or process side, and keep everyone on track and towards the goals. And then there's the managers and supervisors that are involved as they have the direct relationship with those that are most impacted by the change. These people can deliver messages most effectively and provide critical feedback throughout the process. And then there's the employees who ultimately make the change in how they work. Their acceptance and use of the solution determines the success of the change as a whole. So they're obviously critical in this picture. All of these pieces will be impacted by management of your interpersonal and decision-making abilities. And as employees and change managers, we often face difficulties in these moments. Things are not always easy. Our emotions get involved, and there are unconscious prejudices. But being aware of those things can help smooth the edges so that we can show our team our best and most thoughtful self. As we deal with the interpersonal relations of really any team, but definitely a team carrying out big, heavy, high-impact changes, our interpersonal and decision-making abilities will open the doors to many different opportunities between the dynamics. We understand and appreciate how others feel and how to respond appropriately. We can enable each other's strengths and fit the right pieces into the puzzle. I'm sure we've all probably met someone who is very high energy, for example, and maybe they just don't have that energy focused in the right direction, so it feels wasted. It also enables us to remain objective and find solutions when emotions are involved. Obviously, our emotions are a very critical component of the employee's actions and our actions. Change leaders need to be aware of the movement in these emotions within others to help with these team interactions. First, being able to sense it, but then also decide what the right actions to take in response. It can help maintain relationships, teamwork, and your efficiency of the group. So these components of EQ are critical to keeping teams in the right spirits and on the right track. So now that we've talked about the other pillars, we're going to now bring it all together with all of them, including stress management, which is really about your flexibility and how we adapt our emotions. So when we look at this sphere of influence expanding from those immediately surrounding us, the next step is going to be to reach out to the entire organization. So this is where those ripples can be felt from your energy at those second and third degrees of connection away from you. And I think this phenomenon is really well captured by this idea of transformational leadership. And this is the ability to lead by enabling feelings of self-actualization within the employees. So this type of leader, when you're around this type of leader, the desire to change becomes one that's instilled in the individual rather than just something being pushed down upon them by management. Transformational leaders can actually inspire mindset shifts that generate improvement in motivation and behavior towards their self and others. So they have this ability to manage change in an organization's strategy and culture because of this. And they accomplish this by granting trust in the execution and providing more freedom to employees and focus the message on these intangible things like vision and value and building strong relationships. So those traits all require emotional intelligence and work to enable individual growth rather than controlling the employees through punitive measures such as rules, incentives, and power. Transformational leaders use each component of EQ to guide actions that lead to more successful business outcomes. So they lead by example. They have a sense of self that is purpose-driven and they act as role models for others to emulate. They might say they walk the walk and talk the talk. They do a great job of inspiring others by encouraging them to think critically. So they're advocates for those who contribute to solving complex organizational issues. And they want employees to have a vested stake in the company's overall mission. Transformational leaders also stimulate intellectual thinking. They don't necessarily want a yes man or woman. Instead, they value instances when employees can bring something to the table without fear. They are out-of-the-box thinkers, and they encourage others to do the same. So this type of leader also coaches and mentors and supports each employee and takes a sincere interest in their growth and well-being. So they display gratitude and truly value individual contributions. So we know this makes employees more productive and leads to higher levels of job satisfaction. So each of these qualities really digs into the heart of all 5 of the emotional intelligence pillars: self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, decision-making, and your stress management. So using them effectively can help enable this idea of transformational leadership by helping shift motivations from those around you, from yourself, to a greater purpose. So they bring energy that radiates and inspires and can be trusted to make the right decision when times are tough. I think we all know that person who is never really fazed by anything. There's always an answer to keep things moving in the right direction. In our experience, leaders carrying out changes have to be adaptable and act with agility throughout the process. And this is really all about stress management. And it is important not only to balance our own stress levels, but also act as a grounding force to carry others through those uncertain times. With stress being such a common root cause of change resistance, leaders who act with an emotionally intelligent view of the world can recognize these patterns and help individuals work through this uncertainty. We become more open and willing to try new things, even if there are negative perceptions. It allows for optimism and the realization that it can lead to improvement and more positive opportunities. So going through change is not easy in itself, but leading change presents its own problems as well. It involves influencing others, often a lot of time without any real tangible authority over them. And this is where that balance of emotional intelligence and all these pillars come into play to achieve successful results. It allows us to tap into the power of the people, and that's really what change leadership is all about. So this type of leadership looks and feels different, in my opinion, when a leader acts this way emotionally in combination with these grounding principles of organizational change management. It creates incredible results that can really stick and become ingrained in the culture of an organization.
Thank you, David. So we know that these are really big concepts. We understand that, emotional intelligence and change management aren't always paired together, right? And this idea of putting them together and pulling them together and providing safe spaces for them to coexist, as David said, have transformational results on change management. It's a little harder up front, but the change then is lasting and felt deeply, and it's more intrinsic within your organization. So thank you so much for listening. We now want to open it up for Q&A, so questions. There is a Q&A feature in the chat or in the Zoom, so please use that, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for any other questions that you might have.
David and Shannon, we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, can someone's emotional intelligence improve or be changed?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because I know a lot of times, people are defining themselves by personality tests or other assessments where your core personality and your core self usually doesn't change too much. However, the cool thing about emotional intelligence is that once you're aware of it, you can create a plan and build and improve on it. The thing is we have such a high performance society that wants to be the best all the time. So everyone wants to score the highest on all their assessments and tests, but emotional intelligence is a little different. What you want is balance versus high scores all the time. You want to figure out how to use your strengths to balance things that you might not be as strong in, or as we talked about before, use your team to help elevate everyone or the entire change experience. But yes, emotional intelligence can be improved on.
Couple more questions. The next one is, do people's emotional intelligence change based on being at work or their personal situation?
Sure. So a lot of during the emotional intelligence assessment, as if you go through that, a lot of it is based off of how you react in stressful or, situations that would put you in more stressful situations. How do you operate under stress? And that can happen in your personal life or your work life. So usually your emotional intelligence doesn't change too much, but as we talked about, how you leverage your emotional intelligence could have an effect on things. For instance, how you show up as yourself, your self-awareness within your life might be a little different than your self-awareness at work. You might put up different barriers. So you can show up a little differently, but your core emotional intelligence rankings will probably stay the same, if that makes sense.
Couple more questions. The next one is, can you provide recommendations for working with a senior leader who isn't handling a change and the corresponding interpersonnel and decision-making aspects of change as well?
Can you repeat that? There were a lot of words in there.
Yeah. Can you provide recommendations for working with a senior leader who isn't handling a change and the corresponding interpersonnel and decision-making aspects of the change well?
Sure. So it depends on which angle, your relationship to this senior leader, how receptive they are to feedback, where you're ranking, how well you know them, and where you're at in the change. So for instance, if this is a senior leader and you're an individual contributor, there may have to be some ways that you work up and escalate that. My best advice is, when you consistently show up in the way you want change to go, people see you, and when they're around you, it looks and feels differently than when they're working with people where the change isn't going well. One thing I've found is you can use more of a curious consultative approach. So for instance, if you have access to that senior leader, you are in meetings with that senior leader, you're able to have one-on-ones with that senior leader. I use a more consultative type approach where I'm asking questions, I'm being curious, versus saying you're doing this wrong and this isn't working, or this is how it's making me feel. I would say, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more about blank? I heard about this concept of, something in the change. What are your thoughts on that? Or I heard that you said this in our previous meeting. Can you tell me what you mean by that? And usually what happens is they become curious, they try to look within, and they try to answer that. And what you're doing is you're carrying them on a journey to their own self-awareness, where then they can express and really get to the root of why they might be behaving that way. Because again, they might have their own reservations and their own fears that they're trying not to address. But when you ask questions, you can get them to open up a little bit more, and you might find the root cause of that. Let's say they're scared of their own work changing, right? As with a senior leader. Well, how can we then address that as a team so that it doesn't become as scary for everyone in their change roles. It's a difficult thing, but I've found asking questions, using a consultative approach works the best. And then continue to show up in a way with this energy you want to bring to that change. The other thing too is, bringing in, I've been in situations where I've been a senior leader, other senior leaders aren't working, and I brought in coaches, senior consultants to help, be an objective force in change and to bring things that maybe aren't present in that change team. And that has helped too, because then it's not an us versus them. It's a third party coming in, helping to move that along. So a few different options.
Thank you. It looks like one final question. In your experience, what is the emotional intelligence attribute you use most in your change work?
So I'm going to answer, and if you have an answer too, it would be great, but I use optimism. So I'm an extremely optimistic, positive person. It's my double-edged sword sometimes, but it's my greatest strength. And some don't always see the power of it right away, right? They can become a little disenchanted. They sometimes don't feel that my positivity is very real because I'm constantly showing up that way. But however, I also score high on assertiveness, right? And I have this incredible fortitude for getting things done. So I use these two strengths to help balance the teams that I'm trying to get, to move through change or to inspire through change. And I continue to show up positively, consistently, no matter what emotions I'm feeling inside or how things are going on around me. And what this does is this builds trust, and people figure out that my optimism is real. Like, Shannon's not going to stop being positive or optimistic, right? They can feel free to then leverage that in themselves too, to see the hope in these stressful situations and to say, okay, even though this is stressful, we can be positive about this. We can see opportunities through the murkiness, through the confusion. To me, optimism and positivity, they just help me operate better in high stress situations, and I find it helps inspire others. What about you, David?
Yeah, I think you and I are quite similar in the optimism category. I think we're both always looking towards future potential positive opportunities. But for me, the one I was going to say is I think just really falling under that interpersonal pillar of emotional intelligence. Being consultants and change managers, there's so many relationships that need to be built and strengthened throughout a change process, or really any work that we do as consultants, or employees or managers, whatever the situation may be. I like to foster a culture of close teamwork, working well with each other, having fun on the job as well while doing it, and just doing everything possible to make it a good environment to work for with each other.
Right. I like that aspect of joy. You can't forget the fun and the joy in it, right? Are there any other questions?
It looks like that is the final one. So on behalf of Shannon and David and Digineer, I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. This concludes our webinar. Please look for recordings of our webinars on www.digineer.com, and be sure to follow us on our social channels. Also, if you have any additional questions, please send an email to info@digineer.com. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.